of the Silla dynasty and a breakdown in Korean law and order and put Korea into a state of chaos that lasted for a few generations and enabled foreigners to come in and conquer them again. What is so badly wrong with, well, hey, well, it's like I said something about Robin Hood. Robin Hood is famous for robbing the rich to distribute to the poor. No, he should have robbed the poor and given that money to the rich. Oh, yeah, that's right. What is right? Because the richer the rich get, the richer we're all going to get. Make the rich poor, and guess what? We all go down in a pile. Yes?
I feel like that doesn't happen all the time.
Well, I mean, okay, the Chinese
Like
did it
like
twice.
the French Revolution.
French Revolution was a fiasco, a disaster that killed people just for the sake of, if they weren't supporting the revolution strongly enough. They had a reign of terror. Oh, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I'm saying like the rich people were rich because they were taxing the poor people.
The poor didn't pay. I mean, the rich didn't pay taxes. That's true. But I can't, the French Revolution to me is a terrible example. It wound up with Napoleon taking over, and the French did not get to democracy till 80 years after they promised it. First, Napoleon took over, then they had the Bourbon kings come back, then Napoleon III took over, and finally the German took the daylights out of the French, and the French finally got their democracy.
Okay, so what were the French before the?
Oh, they had a very, very big
They had a
rich
higher
class
level.
and a very, very low poor class. And the rich were getting richer, poor and poor. I mean, it was uncomfortable, but redistribution did not help. Now, folk, you're going to have to pardon me for quoting the Bible again, but I want to agree about there's one of the parables of Jesus where that he left some money with 3 servants, and the one servant doubled his, the other servant doubled his, the other servant buried his. When the rich man returned to collect what he found that the person who buried his, he said, take what little he has and give to the man who is the richest. No, take from the poor and give to the rich. This is a parable that's not often quoted, but never, it's there. It's one of them. And any of you who've read the New Testament probably read it. And somebody in this crowd put it, but sir, he already has more than anybody else. Yes, we'll give him more still. This actually occurred, folk, in the Bible. If you don't like it, well, I don't like it either, but nevertheless, it's there. And actually, the more I think about it, the alternative is to take from the rich. Jesse James justified his killings and stealings when he and his gang saw a poor farmer, a really poor, they'd sometimes pull out some of the money and give to this poor farmer to justify and ease their conscience for their stealing and killing. Again, he'd have been better off if he had given the money to the rich because the rich knew how to use it better. I don't like what I'm saying in the least little bit, but I think it's true. Now, why is it important to me? Because our country is fast heading down the road to socialism, in spite of the fact that no one can name an instance where socialism has actually worked. At least I think I've gotten the class awake. At least y'all appear to be listening, and if I've done that much, then I've done my job. All right. Again, the Koreans tried to redistribute to the poor, and the result was disastrous. Civil war ensued. Out of the Civil War came the Koryo. And this dynasty lasted 400 years. The name Korea comes from this Koryo dynasty. But then, after a time, the Koryo was helped by a weakened China and the Great Wall of China that helped keep the Mongolians out. Then finally, the Koryo was finally overthrown. But at this point, we're out of the 1500s, so we'll move on to Vietnam. Again, Korea spent most of its time divided and influenced by foreigners. Today, Korea divided and influenced by foreigners. All right, Vietnam. All right. I got to make those. I have a daughter who's teaching 11-year-olds. And it's a real problem with students who have to go to the bathroom out of turn. I said, in my case, I have it happen almost every afternoon class. And I mean, most of you look like, with all respect, like you're young enough to be my grandchildren. I mean, every day of it. So, why you, and the same people having the same thought. I said, I don't make it to do all right. I just let them go because I could get away with that in college. But so among 11-year-olds, they go out and get into all kinds of mischief. So it's difficult to know how, and handling 11-year-olds these days, folks, it's tough. My daughter can tell you. All right, Vietnam. All right. The earliest inhabitants we know are the Viets, and that's where we get the name Vietnam. The Viets. Now, here's something I want you to remember about the Viets. They were invaded, particularly by the Chinese. Vietnam has a long, long coastline, actually a long, narrow strip of land, but it's bordered on the west by some steep, steep mountains, and the steep mountains separate them from the neighbors to the west, so they've been mostly influenced by China. The Chinese introduced them to the civil service exam, to Confucianism, and the Chinese helped them defeat the United States during the Vietnam War also. But anyway, now, when China first came in, the Viets did not initially welcome Chinese rule. They went to the mountains and they resisted the Chinese the same way they resisted the Mongolians and the Americans later, by practicing guerrilla warfare. In other words, the jungles of Vietnam were conducive to that. A Vietnamese person learned to hide in the foliage, strike, and then vanish. You can't do that in a wide open plain. But in the jungles, you can. They did that to the Chinese, they did that to the French, they did that to the Mongolians, and ultimately did that to the Americans. And ultimately won every time. Well, oh yes, there was a woman who tried to lead the Vietnamese people to war, and she was unsuccessful. One of my students wrote a paper about her some 16 or so years ago. Your book doesn't mention her, and I don't even remember her name. But anyway, there was a woman who tried to lead her people against the Chinese. The Chinese were destined to control Vietnam for 1,000 years, during which the Vietnamese more or less succumbed. The Chinese began the process of Sinification. In other words, to Chinify. We're going to Chinify you people. They looked on the Vietnamese as being uncivilized. Now, folk, I will say this, and some years ago I had a woman tell me that yes, she noticed that to be true also. Vietnam is a tropical country. And in general, tropical peoples are more passive and in general less industrious and less civilized, less advanced than peoples from a temperate climate, a moderate climate. Again, a moderate climate is being one that has a spring, summer, winter, and fall. Tropical climate has a year-round summer. And people with year-round summers, so I'll plant when I feel like it, and I'll harvest when I get ready to. Temperate people, you better plant right when it's time to plant, and you better harvest when it's time to harvest, because if you don't get the seed in the ground right now, the frost is going to get it. If you get it in too early, the frost to get it. If you get it in too late, the frost to get it before it ripens. You've got a small window of opportunity. That might have a lot to do with it. I don't know. But anyway, the process of sonification, the Chinese introduced to them Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. The religion that most of them adopted the most was Buddhism, and again, probably because Buddhism is more appealing to people who come from primitive religions, from spirit religions, from animism, from shamanism, Buddhism, because it's egalitarian. Now, another thing they did, the Vietnamese young people were doing, they would start living together without the benefit of a ceremony. In other words, if they liked each other, just move in together, live with us. So the Chinese said, no, that's uncivilized. You need to have a ceremony. Eventually, the Chinese convinced them of the value of a ceremony, especially when a lot of these living relationships, a person can move in and just easily move right out. Now, again, folk, I'm very much aware of what this nation is coming to. But I still say that your reunion will get more respect if you actually go through a ceremony, invite your friends and crowd, and declare before the whole world that you're married. If you don't like what I'm saying, This time I'm going to say keep it to yourself. I don't want to argue the issue. All right. All right, anyway, the Chinese felt that way, and they felt like it, you know, they wanted to still a lot, to bring them up to civilization, improve their religion. But after 1,000 years, the Viets finally overcame the Chinese, and again, they did it using guerrilla warfare. The Mongolians tried to reconquer the Vietnamese. Well, actually, it was during the Song Dynasty, the weakened Song Dynasty, when Tibet became independent, Korea revolted, and the Vietnamese revolted also and won. The Song Dynasty did not see the value of an army, and as a result, they were overrun by the Mongolians. The Mongolians sent people to Vietnam to conquer it, but I want to remind you, the Mongolians would fight on horseback. They were excellent cavalrymen. They would fight in the wide open plains, and they went to Vietnam, and the Vietnamese fought from crouched positions in the jungle. A Mongolian army would be marching along or galloping along, and all of a sudden one of them would drop down dead. Go a few feet, another one dropped down dead. Go a few feet, and the Mongolians, remember, which one of us is going to be next? It was very demoralizing to them. The Mongolians suffered really heavy casualties as a result of guerrilla tactics. I mean, the Vietnamese knew how to do guerrillas without guns. They could hit a person with a spear and they could never be found. Somehow they could vanish, and the Mongolians did not want to go into that thick grass, or because there might be a venomous snake there, and somehow the venomous snakes did not terrify the Vietnamese. I don't know how they did it, but they did it to us too. After a while, the Mongolians left. The Vietnamese, though, did copy the Chinese model of government. They had a civil service exam, and unlike Japan and the other countries, any male person, I have to say man, any man could take the exam. And the exam determined who was qualified for government position. Shintoism never found its way outside of Japan. Shintoism did not spread to Vietnam, did not spread to Korea, and did not spread into China. It remained exclusively Japanese. Your book makes a point of that, so I will also. Now, as for women, women were more equal in Vietnam than they were in any country in the Far East. They could inherit, they could own land, and they could initiate divorce proceedings against their husbands, something that the other countries in the Far East generally did not allow. But they could divorce their husbands. Basically, they were more equal. And this is, again, a tendency among your tribal peoples, more equality between genders and more equality between everybody than you find among the more advanced peoples. Again, take that for whatever you will. No, the Vietnamese spent most of their time fighting foreigners, and their terrain made it really, really difficult for foreigners to stay, to hold them. The French had to give up on them in 1954 when the French lost a big battle to them. They gave up, the United States took over, the United States lost also. They won war that we have lost. Anyway, there is an old saying, as the Chinese said it, and a lot of history repeats itself. These people are oftentimes doing in the 21st century, and even in the 20th, during my lifetime, they're doing the same things they did for hundreds of years before this time. Living the same way, fighting the same kind of wars, fighting off the same enemies, and fighting among themselves who are not fighting their enemies, and fighting with the same similar techniques that their ancestors did. And in the case of Vietnam, it worked. I mean, Islam never made any headway in Vietnam. And for the same reason the Mongolians didn't. The Mongolians fought the same way the Islamic people do. And it was a type of fighting that will not work in the jungles of Vietnam. All right, now, let me give you a word of advice about studying for Monday's test. In this morning's class, I got through with the lecture early, And I gave a lot of stuff that's going to be on the test, and you'll see it on the video that is already online. I mean, I was able to put it online between classes. So the video this morning, you might want to look particularly at the last part of it. Now, you'll be given 3 different tests. So what I say it's going to be on the test, a third of you will see this question, and the other 2/3 of you won't. But one thing I really want you to know, I think is important, the big issue of why the Chinese did not develop like the West did. I think they were united. This is just me. I think that unity really hurt them. But also, they were more interested, the men were in getting high government positions than they were in anything else. And the government is not everything. And also, they developed an attitude of we're so much better than everybody else that we don't need to learn from anybody else. I want to tell you, the most primitive people on earth were the Australian Aborigines, but they had one device that nobody in the world had, called the boomerang. And nobody could figure, why did only they have it and nobody else? Well, they taught us something. I mean, I once knew of something else they had that nobody had. But at least see, everybody has something that nobody else has. So that's why every group, everybody is important. But the the Chinese felt like we are the best people on earth, and therefore we don't need, especially we don't need to learn anything from those primitive Europeans. The Japanese learned from the Europeans, and Japan almost conquered China in the 1930s. But again, Japan overextended itself. All right.